I had some 5/4 by 6 clear beech trim that I ran through my table saw, kind of like resawing, cut all the way through except for about 1/8 of an inch in the middle to hold the boards together, and then using my bow saw, it's easy then just to separate these, and these became the core of a finger joint box that I was going to make after planing these down to about a 7/16 thickness. After planing, these became just perfectly clear 7/16 inch boards, and I went to my finger joint jig, which uses a piece of 1/8 inch aluminum. My saw blade cuts at 1/8 of an inch. I happen to have some 1/8 inch aluminum, so the deal is here you have an 1/8 inch guide with an 1/8 inch gap and an 1/8 inch saw blade, and you get a perfect 1/8 inch finger joint. And I found this jig works really well. It's very accurate because my saw blade happens to be the exact thickness of the 1/8 inch aluminum, and you can see I get a really good finger joint. So what I did is just made a shorter version of this for this 7/16 inch wood, just to see how these joints went together, and I was satisfied with the cut and the adjustment, and so I went to cutting the finger joints in all of the sides of the box. With the boards being so narrow, I was able to stack 2 and cut 2 boards at a time. So I just had to repeat this process 4 times to get all 8 ends cut. And so even though it's a little tedious to begin with, once you get a rhythm going with 2 boards at a time, it cuts pretty quickly. This little aluminum guide section fits so nicely in the slot. The boards slide quickly in and out of that slot. The slot was so short that they went off and on very quickly, and it was pretty quick to be able to go down a whole row of boards and get those knocked out. So it didn't take long to be able to get the box at least into a square situation where I could then trim it and then square it and then glue it. So here I'm going to just even up my ends. I put some blue tape on these ends so that as I run it through the saw, I don't get tear out. And I found that once you did this to both sides, you could get a good level cut on the top and the bottom with very little misalignment. It was pretty easy to sand the misalignment out. You can see this just ran through here really quickly. I end up later again doing even another adjustment to the height of this box because I wanted it to fit in a certain drawer, and it was too tall the first time through. Glue up is pretty straightforward with clamps, and then I used a square to make sure I was getting 90-degree corners and put that one angled clamp on it to pull the misalignment out of it, and ended up with a dead square box. And once these finger joints dry, as far as the glue, this box is very, very, very sturdy on its own. For the bottom and for the lid, I had some scrap left over of the milled beech, and I also had some thin cedar and I had some walnut available for the top and some darker cedar for the bottom. I thought I'd put a stripe in it. I was just making this thing out of literally scrap around the shop. And I ended up with a top and a bottom. And the way I made this work was illustrated here. The top just is got a rabbet around it that fits tightly into the cavity of the box. The bottom, I have it stair-stepped, so I cut a rabbet in the box itself. You'll see here in a second as I raise this up. I cut a rabbet in the box, and that rabbet is the size of the outside edge of the bottom. Then the rabbet on the bottom goes up into the box. What that gives you is 1, 2, 3 gluing surfaces for the bottom. It also lets the bottom stick out just a little bit. I think boxes look nice when they kind of look like they're hovering over the ground. And so here I am just preparing this is the bottom. And what I did is just put a sacrificial fence on the table saw and set the blade right up against that fence. And I'm just taking out a small rabbet, literally about 1/8 by 1/8 rabbet in that bottom. So it's going to sit up into the rabbet in the bottom of the box about 1/4 of an inch, and then about another 1/8 of an inch will sit below the box. And you can see as I press this down into that double rabbet, it's proud of the bottom of the box by 1/8 of an inch. And I think it looks nice, and it's super tight, lots of glue surface, and I think it will be definitely a secure bottom. For the top, I used Beech again that I had milled down, and I put a stripe of walnut in it. So I just cut a little rip of walnut, stuck it in there. I ran all these through the planer to get them level, and here I am just coming up with an outside dimension for that lid by holding the box up to the saw. And so there's my outside dimension for the lid. I cut the ends using a miter box, so I got good 90-degree cuts. And here I am cutting more of a 1/4 inch, almost 1/2 inch, maybe 7/16 inch rabbet around the edge of the lid, because it's going to sit flush on the top of that box as far as the outside edge, and the inside of that rabbet will sit down in the box. I put a finger hole to remove the lid. What I've done here is used a very skinny bit to drill a hole all the way through the lid in order to be able to line up a Forstner bit and drill only halfway through from each side, using that tiny hole as my guide, so that the 2 holes, one drilled from each side of the board, meet in the middle, and you don't have any risk of blowout. And so once I had drilled that, I ran around that 1-inch hole with a round over bit to just soften the finger hole, so that when you grab it, it's not a raw, sharp edge, but a nice rounded edge. Sanded it, finished it, waxed it. Here's the finger hole for removing the lid. Works like a charm. And so you can see how that just lifts right off of there real nice. So then it came time to just finishing the box. And what I did is used sandpaper to get it down smooth, sanded over all the finger joints to level those out. I put 2 coats of shellac on it. I really like this shellac finish. It goes on super easy. Just rub it on with a rag, kind of clumsily, kind of heavy. Rub that on, try to even it out with strokes at the end. Let that sit. It dries very quickly. I usually will sand that first coat with 220 grit, and then I'll put a second coat on just the same way, sand it a second time with 220 grit, and that gives you a very, very smooth, flat surface that is sealed and adds a little bit of color. It helps to add some pop to those finger joints because the shellac is soaking into the end grain of the finger joints. And again, a super easy finish. 2 coats on, 2 sandings of 220 grit, and then I apply a fairly heavy coat of paste wax, and I apply the paste wax with steel wool. And that gives it one last sort of a buff job. And once you've done that, you end up with a very nice finish that feels good to the touch and a good protective finish for the box. So here I am doing that wax finish. Again, I'm applying it with a little wad of steel wool. I rub it with the grain. Don't know that that's important, but I tend to put it on that way. I put it on relatively thick, let it sit for like 5 minutes, and then come back and buff it, pretty briskly to get it to gloss up. Again, you end up with a very friendly surface, a very good looking surface, and super simple, like almost no way to do it wrong. So once I had this finished to my liking, I went to the drawer where it was going. I made this just to hold a bunch of plain parts, totes and knobs and odds and ends that I've collected over the years for planes. And I made the box to fit the drawer perfectly. I'm going to make a second box to go on the left-hand side of the drawer. Probably a silly idea, but again, it all started with having this nice 5/4 Beech, and I wanted to make something out of it, and went for a really nice custom box. Fits the drawer perfectly, looks really nice, super sturdy, and holds the stuff I was after holding. So, hope you've enjoyed the video. If you have, please subscribe, and thank you very much for watching. Here it goes into the drawer. Thanks again for watching.